The nature versus nurture debate has gone on far longer than I've been alive. But either way, both play into each other. Today I want to look at one aspect of that, the nurture, and ask, are we our memories? Am I who I am because of who I was? Let's find out. And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is Memories. So this started out as a Westworld bonus video, but I quickly realized this is one of those things that can keep you up at night. One of those questions so big that maybe it's too deep for a silly show like this to deal with. However, I also realize there's a lot of stories out there that deal with it. So as we walk through the heart of the stories we tell, sometimes we have to delve into a heavy subject. So what is memory? Memory is our ability to encode, store, retain, and subsequently recall information and past experiences in a human brain. It can be thought of in general terms as the use of past experiences to affect and influence current behavior. One of those deep philosophical things that we can play with in the comments is whether or not we are just a product of our memories. If I had your memories and you had mine, would I still be me and you still be you? Or would you be me and I'd be you? So today I'm going to dive into that very question, and I'm going to do so by looking at stories that mess with characters' minds. I'm going to be switching around a lot. So spoiler warnings for, well, a whole bunch of things. We're going to throw up the spoiler warning for Babylon 5 through the episode Zahadum, the entire first season of The Magicians, the Emperor Joker comic book series, the first season of Westworld, and the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Well, we might touch on a few other things with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because that's one of my favorite shows that I go to all the time. But that's not the only warning I have to throw up here. Because you know what, today I'm going to dive into some pretty deep questions, so I have to put this here. I'm going to try to dance around the super messed up things as best I can, but especially when it comes to the magicians, there's just no way you can do it without explaining just how bad some of these things are. Just to recap, Westworld is where we're starting. And you know what? They make robots that are programmed with memories and that fake being real in some form of game that's kind of like one part RPG and one part Ren Fair. They found out early on that the way to program them to be the most realistic is to give them bad backstories, horrific stories. And you know what? That kind of makes sense if you think about it. At the end of the day, aren't people that are too nice, too good of a backstory unrealistic? Doesn't everyone have some hidden pain in their past? So of course it makes it more realistic that way. Now the real question is, once they woke up and had true sentience, what happens then? Well, it occurs right after the program allows them to access those original memories, because that's how they learn. That's who they are, their own memories. Babylon 5 plays with this a little bit, because you see, Babylon 5 is my first pivot, with the death of the mind. In the 2250s, the world is one government, and is not quite at the Star Trek level of utopia, but it's supposed to be at least somewhat more enlightened than we are now. Instead of the death penalty, they have, for their worst crimes, the death of personality. We see a few examples across the seasons, but the biggest is a monk doing good work. The brother was once a wanted criminal, though, a serial killer, the Black Rose Killer. They wiped his mind and created a new, helpful personality. That's, supposed to be better than death penalty. Well, Jakar says in the episode Zahadum, there is a death greater than the death of the flesh, the death of hope. Well, by that logic, wouldn't the death of personality be at least as bad as a death of flesh? And remember, he's not the only example, this is just one. In that same episode where Jakar said that, we have Anna Sheridan. She's the wife of the captain of the ship, and presumed dead for most of the series. Now, I can't believe that JMS, the writer, didn't mean this to be a parallel. Anna was taken years ago by the bad guys and presumed dead. She returns from the dead working for the bad guys and claiming they're not really that bad. She lures the captain into the trap. The trick is he knows it's a trap, and to quote him, "You plugged her into one of those ships. This isn't her anymore." Physically it was Anna Sheridan, but in her mind, Anna died years ago on the crew with the Icarus. So, there was a great example of you're not who you are if your mind is different. But so far we've only talked about villains and morally gray people, and them mind wiping. What about when the heroes do it? Well, that's where Emperor Joker comes in. The Emperor Joker story is a crazy thing that took place a few years ago when Joker gets the reality warping powers of Mixplit, whatever his name was, and he rewrites the world. It's a crazy train of awesome. Part of it, he uses his powers to torture Batman. He kills him over and over again and brings him back, killing him in worse and worse ways. Now, PTSD and breaking under torture is no laughing matter, and in the real world, it happens. However, in a fantasy story, they may not always be the most respectful of that, and in order to cure Batman of this PTSD, they take the memories away. Now, of course, they can't just destroy the memories or wipe the memories, they need to transplant them. So they transplant them to Superman. First, I will acknowledge that people handle stress differently, and that what it takes to break one person may not be the same as what it takes to break another. But this makes little sense when you think about the amount of stress, especially when you basically are just going to forget the whole thing in the next storyline and Superman's never going to show any repercussions. It's even worse when you realize that Batman himself is a creation of tragedy, his own history and origin. The question of who would Bruce Wayne be if his parents weren't shot in front of him is a subject for another day, along with the memory wipes of identity crisis, which really opens up a can. Stick a pin in that for another time. But really, Superman can handle it better than Batman? Why? Because he has someone to talk to? Because he loves Lois? I get the feeling they were just going for a little bit too much of the play on Superman's better than Batman there, and they didn't think it through. DC is far from the only ones to do it, though. Let's switch over to the MCU for a second and see if this isn't familiar. Phil Coulson died in the first Avenger movie, but his magical trip to Tahiti changed that. Of course, like in comics, death is just a minor inconvenience when a writer wants to bring a character back. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had to resurrect him through Kree blood, though, the idea being that the process has drawbacks, so it couldn't be used on anyone. The human mind can't handle dying and coming back. So S.H.I.E.L.D. rewrites his memories, so he was hurt but not dead, and went to Tahiti and healed. The problem is there are too many questions that come up constantly. Nothing quite adds up, until he finally has to confront the truth. Which, if you think about it, should have probably still broke him. However, it doesn't. Now, unlike the Batman-Superman example, this one has a little better of a workaround. The answers come slowly, he can deal with them bit by bit, and you can still say that it affected him. In fact, the Phil Coulson that shows up in the most recent episodes definitely isn't the same one that showed up all the way back in Iron Man 1. So to be fair, this did have some consequences. And that brings us back to Westworld, doesn't it? Westworld has this big question of ethics. If you can program something so close to being human, then letting it be tortured over and over again is a pretty bad thing. Now, being on HBO, it allows them to go into some pretty crazy things. And I don't just mean the normal levels of violence, because I mean they stab these things, they shoot these things, they make these things watch as their kids are killed in front of them, they rape them repeatedly. I mean, in general, there's a lot of bad people. In fact, it's why I feel none of the human characters are really good. Even the ones that are okay are pretty terrifying. But again, before they could actually remember these things, was it that bad? I mean, as long as you're mind wiping them, setting them back. But once they can remember, once they can learn, once they know how bad it is, and as bad as that show is, at least it's on HBO, because Sci-Fi Channel's trying to give them a run for their money for shock value, with a TV show based on a book series that, before you say it, I haven't read the book series, so I don't know, called The Magicians. There's a lot to cover with The Magicians. Let's start with the fact that it's a magical school that wipes your memory if you fail the entrance exam. That's right. Even though the dean is self-taught, and amongst themselves they know that there are people that can teach magic other than themselves, they have the right to take away your remembrance of even having magic just because you failed the entrance exam, even though they are not police in and of themselves. Now, the first season, there's a lot of mind-wiping going on, but there's one in particular. And before I go into it, I have to throw this up here one more time because this is one of the worst. One of the main characters in the show was not allowed into magic school, but she made herself remember and fell in with a bad crowd and tried to learn magic on her own. And then she fell into a cult, and actually the cult had to try to sneak back into the school because the cult leader had 3 years of her memories replaced. Things look like they're turning around for her when our main characters meet up with her again. She's healing, she's in a good place, until the first time it's hinted that there's a mind wipe. Yeah, there's a mind block is a better word. So okay, the mind block is warned about from one character, but then another character trying to do a helpful thing removes the block when it shouldn't be removed. And I'm serious, this is pretty messed up, because after this show makes a lot of sexual jokes, some of which I even find funny, they go right into full-on rape, and that's no laughing matter. It's a physical and mental assault that many people can never recover from. In this case, it might even be worse. Rape victims blame themselves even when there's nothing they could have done to prevent it. In this case, the trickster god who does this to her points out to blame her and makes her watch as he kills her friends in front of her. If ever there was a good thing to block off, a painful memory so painful that it needed to be repressed, I think this would be it. So not to dwell on it too much, I will say that to the writer's credit, she does break it down again when the memories return. So, what do all these stories have in common? And what do they mean? Well, that's where this gets complicated again. All of these are stories about changing a person by changing their memories. All of them are about the fact that we are more than the sum of our parts, but at the same time, we are the sum of our memories. Even more important, they ask the question, can our memories be trusted? In the real world, we don't have magic spells or brain-wiping machines, but we do have psychological tricks. Some are weapons, but some are things that we just do to ourselves, the flaws in our own minds. Every time you pull up a memory, you change it. Sometimes in a minor way, but sometimes we make ourselves prisons in our own mind. See, remember not just facts, but feelings. And as such, every time you pull a memory up, you have a chance to change that memory. Pull up a joke that was a little funny, but laugh every time you do it, and it makes it seem to you like it was more funny. It also causes nostalgia. Remember those good times, back when everything was better? Well, remember them enough, and you'll filter through and remember only those things. Now imagine what happens when you do that with bad things. Imagine a horrible memory. Imagine if everyone you bring up that memory, it feels worse and worse. Imagine if a little bit changes here and there, getting darker, you create a loop of misery. If you've ever heard of PTSD or flashbacks, you have some idea of exactly what type of living hell this could be. Now, I hope most of you don't have to deal with that ever, and that type of painful memory is far from your real world. So I'm going to tie it into something that's a little more normal to relate to, and plug next week's video at the same time. For the month of February, I'm going to be looking at Valentine's Day and love stories. But let's take a look at the other end of the love story, the breakup. Have you ever been in a relationship and thought they were the one you truly loved, the perfect person for you? And then, after you broke up, boom, weren't they the worst? Well, it's not just that hindsight is 20/20. I'll tell you, I've had friends that tell me that every person they dated were jerks, even though when they were dating them, they seemed to think they were the best. A long time ago, things might have felt different, but the truth of the matter is, every time you pull up that memory, you're polluting it. And the bad feelings you have now towards the person bleed into that memory. You're turning your happy memory sad because you remember the bad ending. Now, is there something we can do about it? Oh, I'm just some idiot on YouTube looking at stories, not a psychologist. But part of what we do is we write stories about memories, and how and why and who we are, and maybe entertain ourselves while bringing those deep thoughts to mind. For those of you interested, I talk about each of these shows each week and do weekly looks into the idea of stories themselves. So if you like my crazy ideas, just give me a subscribe, a share, and a like, and help me build our community. Then join me back here next time, as we hopefully take a little more fun of a look through the heart of the stories we tell. Thanks for watching.